We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back talking liberty with Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor and fount of all knowledge, Mr. Scott D. Cosenza. Earlier in the show, we talked about the legal shenanigans taking place this election cycle. But now I want to drift ever so gently into an interesting liberty-based piece of news that I came across. Now, Scott, there was an open letter from some fairly high-profile law professors who argued that Joe Biden should overturn the, air quotes here, mistaken decisions of the MAGA court. Now, Scott, I just want to read you a short excerpt from that and get your take on this. Mm-hmm. So here it goes. Quote, "We urge President Biden to restrain MAGA justices immediately by announcing that if and when these issue rulings that are based on gravely mistaken interpretations of the Constitution that undermine our most fundamental commitments, the administration will be guided by its own constitutional interpretations." End quote. Scott, a constitutional lawyer, what's your take on that?
It's good to be the king. And
it's good to be king. It is indeed.
This is the work of Harvard law professor Mark Tushnet and San Francisco State University political scientist Aaron Belkin. And it quite literally, and I don't say this to denigrate the proposal, but to accurately characterize it, it says that if Biden strenuously disagrees with a Supreme Court ruling that he considers to be, I think, fundamental or some other word like that's a cousin to that word, that it's okay for him to just go ahead and ignore, practically speaking, actually the opposite of ignore, excuse me. They don't actually ask that he ignore it. They say that he announce why the Supreme Court is incorrect and their interpretation of the law is wrong, and that he's going to follow his correct interpretation of the Constitution, and that if the courts don't like it and he won't follow their court orders, that the redress that we have as a republic is at the voting booth. Now, of course, the funny thing that I thought is, if they let in, let's just say hypothetically, let's say there was not President Biden, just some other president, okay, let in millions and millions of illegal immigrants, okay, against the law, and let
such
them
a thing
vote.
could never happen in America. It's clearly hypothetical,
against
right?
The law, and then other people challenged those votes because it produced a result whereby we didn't honor our democracy. Then the result would be, well, he doesn't have to listen to the courts anyway because the votes are in. And so it's a circular kind of, it's a cycle of that recycling 3-arrow kind of thing of, he gets to do whatever he wants just because he can. That is sort of that's the argument. And the kind of thing that just sort of baffles everybody and just kind of has everybody gobsmacked is was a popular argument by segregationists when the liberals in our country led the charge to desegregate America and got all these court rulings that broke down the barriers of segregation. And the segregationists said, well, Supreme Court wants to go ahead and integrate this school. Let them come down and enforce their order, right? Like the governors would, these Southern governors. And, of course, that's not what we had. That's why Kennedy famously, sent the troops into Little Rock and other places to enact these desegregation, because they were enforcing a court ruling. So you can imagine if that never happened, the Supreme Court relies on the executive to enforce their rulings. So
I've got to dig deeper into this, Scott. So presumably, and now I am making a presumption here, but I would say that this professor and political scientist are on the left of the political divide. I mean, it's an assumption. I know you should never do such things, but I find it curious because we've seen in the papers in these recent weeks all sorts of stories about how if Donald Trump wins in 2024, he plans to seize powers from federal agencies and rest them within the executive, and how we should be very afraid of that. And yet these two gentlemen and I'm guessing they must be Democrats based on their language, they want Joe Biden to go even further than that. How does anybody square that circle?
Well, Mark, it's confusing to me because don't you realize that they have the purest of intentions and brother love and worship of the common man, and Donald Trump is bad. And so when Donald Trump has powers that are all encompassing, he uses them for badness, and so that's a poor exercise of power. But when Mark Tushnet and Aaron Belkin convince people to give Joe Biden dictatorial style powers, it's because he's using them in a Christ-like fashion for all our betterment, that it becomes a force for good, and that's why we should do it.
Yeah, okay. So it's all about the perspective then, is it, Scott? So let me put this as bluntly
it's madness is the answer.
Yeah, it's madness.
It reads like madness. And here's all you have to do, I think, to think about it is apply it to the other side.
Yeah.
Two kind of out there a bit conservative legal theorists say that President Trump should ignore Supreme Court rulings by ultra Soros justices. Okay, that would be the mirror image, because they're threatening democracy, and just if and not. I mean, people would be going crazy if that actually was implemented on that side.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I think maybe also, there is some critical thinking and rationality left on the left in the Republic to also see that this is a recipe for disaster.
Well, I mean, let's put this as bluntly as we can, what this recipe actually is. As far as I can follow it, if Joe Biden followed or attempted to follow the advice of these Harvard and San Francisco scholars, it would effectively end the three branches of government system, wouldn't it? And yet these university professors, I think, I know the Harvard gentleman is professor. I presume the political science chap is also. They teach at university. They teach law and political science, and yet they're suggesting that we do away with the whole three branches of government.
Well, they don't actually say those words. That's your
But that is
of
the result, isn't it?
Well, one of the things I think it's important to talk about is how we don't have a system whereby what the Supreme Court should do and how it should do it is clearly delineated in our Constitution, like the roles of our president and the executive branch and senators and congresspersons in the legislative branch are clearly delineated. So the Supreme Court, Article 3 of our Constitution it lays out the Supreme Court, and it is very brief and broad compared to the specificity and length that Articles 1 and 2 cover, those other branches. And so it wasn't clear to everyone at the time the Republic was founded, like how the Supreme Court would actually work. It wasn't until 1803 in the case of Marbury versus Madison that the court asserted its power to strike down legislation as unconstitutional, and the other branches went along with it. And if they didn't go along with it, we may have had and would have had an entirely different history and republic, Mark. But the Supreme Court asserted in 1803 that they had the power to do it, and we've gone along with it ever since.
And a final question for you, Scott. We presume that Joe Biden will not implement this particular suggestion, but he is trying to expand the court. That appears to be coming from a hard left position, that they can dilute the power of the court to get to the position that they want, which is overturning or getting rid of these big decisions, right?
Well, I think maybe wrong on the first part of your question, which is that Biden wouldn't do it. And here's why. I read a conservative legal commentator that may have been Jonathan Turley. I can't exactly recall now who it was, who said that Mr. Tushnet and Mr. Belkin were actually writing with an audience of one in mind when they published their letter. And that audience was Joe Biden, who, because of his long presence on the Senate Judiciary Committee and being a law school graduate after he was readmitted after his plagiarism scandal, I think, he fashions himself a legal scholar. And also, according to some folks who have examined his positions on it, not terribly, not with great fidelity necessary to the Constitution or mainstream legal thought, when it may benefit him to deviate from it. So
I have my answer. An audience of one to the detriment of all. Scott DiCosenza, thanks ever so much.
Thank you.
And that's almost all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'd like to thank our guests today, Graham J. Noble and Scott D. Cosenza, and extend my deep appreciation to you, the listeners, for taking the time to join us today. I'd like to leave you with the wise words of George Washington. He said, quote, "A primary object should be the education of our youth in the science of government. In a republic, what species of knowledge can be equally important? And what duty more pressing than communicating it to those who are to be the future guardians of the liberties of the country?" Now, it seems to me that those who seek power are missing the key education that George Washington suggested. Why else would the republic be suffering so badly if not for those in control, fundamentally not understanding the processes of said government? Now, surely they wouldn't be making a hash of things because they were either dishonest or incompetent, would they? Well, I'll leave you to think on that yourself. Thanks for listening. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are libertynation.com.